Our next guest has arrived. This morning represents the Minnesota's 6th Congressional District. Prior to her election to Congress, she served in the Minnesota State Senate, where she championed a taxpayer's Bill of Rights. A mother of 5 who's cared for 23 foster children. She's supported expanded educational benefits for veterans and their families. She supported generous increases in the VA budget to include the hiring of 1,000 new claims adjusters to ease the VA backlog. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable United States Representative Michele Bachmann.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. Welcome to Minnesota on behalf of all Minnesotans. We are thrilled you are here, and we hope that you enjoy our beautiful city and our beautiful state while you're here. I also would like to express my thanks to the National Commander Jimmy Foster for his service to the American Legion. We are so proud that 92 years ago, the newly formed American Legion hosted their very first convention right here in the beautiful city of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And after its founding in 1919, the Legion served more than 4 million American veterans of the First World War. And just in the last few months, the last of those veterans in the war to end all wars, Frank Buckles, was laid to rest after living to be an astounding 110 years of age. Frank was the very last doughboy who was dedicated in his very last years of his life to ensuring that the sacrifices of all of the doughboys were appropriately remembered. What an incredible man Frank was. Generations of military men and women have sacrificed their time, their comfort, and unfortunately all too often their very lives to protect not only our Constitution, but our God-given liberties, our freedoms. Because every single day, our freedoms need defending, and I'm thankful for the thousands today who are serving us in Afghanistan, those winding down the operations in Iraq, and those who are stationed in bases all across the globe. They now deserve the distinction, as all of you do, as our very best Americans, and we owe them a debt that we can never fully repay. Throughout our history, you, our veterans, have faced different enemies, but you've always had the same friend, an ally in the American Legion and in the VFW and in the other veterans service organizations. There are those who want to tell us that our day as the free world's leader has passed. I don't believe that statement. And when we conduct our foreign policy apologetically, from leading from behind, I believe that that in fact weakens the United States' credibility across the world. Such was the case for the United States and for Britain in the late 1970s. Both countries, as you recall, had declined, both economically and militarily, and both had lost their standing as the world's leaders. Their weakness, in turn, led to the adventurism by the Soviet Union and by other nations, including Iran. It took 2 very strong leaders on the world stage, one a woman and one a man, to reverse the course of their respective countries. And it was 31 years ago that the radical mullahs in Iran released the American hostages. It almost seems like a day ago, doesn't it? When we thankfully welcomed home, after over 400 days, the illegally held hostages. And rather than face President Reagan and the Argentine junta's invasion of the Falkland Islands in April of 1992, they were met by Margaret Thatcher in the firmest way and with the most assuring touch. These were the first victories of Ronald Reagan's presidency and of Margaret Thatcher's tenure as the Prime Minister of Britain, and we should heed the lessons that they hold for dealing with those who seek to wreak havoc on peace and on democracy across the world today. Because I believe for the sake of our own security and for the defense of our values in the affairs of the world, American leadership has always been critical to the peace and safety and prosperity of the world. Throughout decades of struggle, free nations have prevailed over tyranny because of the sacrifices of the men and women of the United States Armed Forces. Those we depend on, our troops, should know that when they become veterans, they can depend on us. And honoring this obligation will require leadership. And I promise you that I will lead, not from behind, but I will lead from the front. Because it is our duty, first and primarily, to protect our veterans and to make sure that you receive not only the respect, but also the care that you have paid for very heavily with your service to our nation. And as President, I will assure that those who serve today as well and in the past have the highest access to the best care, both of health, mental health, and rehabilitative care that the world has to offer. And that begins, I believe, by repealing Obamacare, which will have terrible which I not only believe but know will have terrible consequences for you, our veterans. Why? Because it will help you with a new increased tax on medical devices that many wounded veterans need, and by cutting payments to doctors that treat TRICARE patients. This will only make access to doctors even tougher for all of you and for all Americans. And I will make sure that we keep our promises to your veterans' retirement benefits. Many of our young men and women have served multiple tours in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and many have had their tours extended. And now, as many of our nation's finest heroes return home, we should appropriately honor them and welcome them with a hero's welcome, just as we should rightly honor those who have gone before in wars of other generations. I honor my own father, who served honorably in the United States Air Force and who is now laid to rest here in Fort Snelling in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I honor my stepfather, who honorably served in the United States Navy, in Army, and my brother, who retired full United States Navy. Those who serve today also deserve a country where, when their service is over, they can know with complete and full assurance that they will also have the same opportunity for a good life, like all of you had. But our current economic path is making that less and less possible for returning soldiers. Earlier this year, you may recall that Congress was embroiled in a bitter funding battle. If the government would have shut down, our troops would not have received their paychecks on time, including our deployed soldiers overseas. This must never happen. I committed to donating my pay as a member of Congress during any government shutdown to any military nonprofit, but I went a step further. I joined one of my colleagues, Louis Gohmert of Texas, and co-sponsored a bill to ensure that military paychecks would always go out on time and that our men and women in uniform would never again become political pawns in Congress's budget battles. But sadly, even this year and just months later, history repeated itself again, because troop pay became another point of uncertainty again this summer during the debt ceiling debate. We saw a variety of scare tactics that were employed not only by our president, but also by the Treasury Secretary as well. And I believe that the debt ceiling did not need to be raised because I believed we needed to pay the interest on the debt and instead focus on prioritizing America's spending, because the problems of this nation are today. They are not tomorrow. And Congress needs to step up and solve the problems now and not push them off to the future. I joined my fellow congressman from Iowa, Steve King. We introduced the Promises Act because we believe that we need to do exactly what the act says: keep America's promises. We need to pay both the interest on the debt and send to the military the paychecks that they not only deserve, they've earned. The debt ceiling deal that was signed by the president could have even more drastic consequences, I am sorry to report to you today, because it could come in the form of, and I'm serious, over $500 billion in cuts, of non-discriminating cuts to our military's budget if a super committee, which I believe is one of the worst ideas we have ever seen in our country, if this super committee of 12 members of Congress fails to reach agreement, over $500 billion will be cut out of the military, all while the United States is engaged in 3 conflicts overseas. As President of the United States, I want to assure you completely and wholly that our armed services will never again be political pawns in political deal-making in Washington, D.C. It is a sobering thought to think that even today, our federal government is adding every single day $4 billion in overspending. That means every day we are borrowing $4 billion from somewhere, either the next generation or from nations who don't necessarily have our best interests in heart. We were very shortly, at the very beginning of Ronald Reagan's presidency, the greatest creditor nation in the world. I am sorry to report that today we are the world's leading debtor nation. When we are borrowing $4 billion a day, this is a disservice to our United States military. Very soon, cuts will be the norm and not the exception. But we must, and I will, keep the faith to you, our veterans. And in fact, our spending and debt is so now out of control that by 2020, within 9 years, the interest on repaying our debt will be larger than the United States' entire military budget. That's sobering. And even worse, the interest on the payments on the debt are going to the Chinese, and those payments are going to build up Chinese military efforts. The Chinese military, as you know, recently purchased their first aircraft carrier. The United States is now sending money to build up the Chinese military. That's why I believe the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, wisely said, the American national debt is the greatest threat to America's national security. I believe a president should pay sobering heed to those words of our Joint Chiefs of Staff. Serving you, our veterans, doesn't have to be complex. It just has to be done. Some of the challenges that were created by these terrible economic conditions that we find ourselves in are leading to the unemployment level of veterans. That's unacceptably high, and it's sad because it's higher than the national average, because I believe that the jobs that we need to have in manufacturing and technology and innovation would be well served by our veterans. They're perfect for these jobs. As president, I want to see the United States of America make things in this country again. We can't have other nations doing all the making. We need to do the making. And I stand against the current administration's assault on national security apparatus. The White House is taking power away from the military through a never-before-seen reduction in resources during wartime. I'm a member of the Permanent Select Committee in the House of Representatives on the intelligence. We deal with the nation's classified secrets, and I am regularly briefed on the threats that the United States receives, both within our borders and both externally against our borders. I understand the threats that America faces every day. As Commander-in-Chief, I will commit the necessary resources to our first constitutional duty of government, which is to protect our nation, to keep our people safe and secure and sovereign. Because never forget, we are home to the greatest military force the world has ever known, and it is my intention to keep it that way. And like you, I am also committed to winning the war on terror. We have to. We don't have a choice. Killing bin Laden did not end the war on terror. And we can never forget that every day there are terrorists who wake up thinking about how they will kill Americans today and destroy the United States of America today. That is America's challenge, but America is up for that challenge. Very shortly, we will observe the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and we will never forget that that plan was hatched in the mountains of Afghanistan. As president, my decision to withdraw troops from Afghanistan will be based upon military considerations. They will not be based upon my own political considerations. We must and we can win Afghanistan, but we must provide General Allen the resources he deserves in order to win this conflict. In 2007, I spoke out in support of the surge that was brilliantly employed by David Petraeus, a national hero, and I will continue to support that strategy. But we should never put our troops into harm's way unless there is first a clear and vital United States interest and mission. We never will half-heartedly commit our troops to battle without a true end plan, without knowing our enemy and also knowing our mission. And as president, I will always use the full resources of our military to bring about a quick and ready resolution to achieve victory. When the president has had his attention on instructing Israel to give back land necessary to protect their existence, he has taken his eye off the real threat in the Middle East, and that is a nuclear Iran. As president, I want you to know I will stand with our ally Israel, and I will stand against a nuclear Iran. Several years ago, I had this distinct privilege of standing with one of the veterans in my district here in Minnesota, along with the local American Legion. He received his Silver Star Medal after 40 years after it was awarded to him. His name is Ron Kane, and Ron told me that he did what he had to do. Ron was serving in Vietnam as an Army platoon sergeant in the 1st Battalion in the 506th Infantry. It was July 11th on 1969 when his battalion found itself under very heavy enemy fire. But Ron Kane didn't hesitate. He put himself out in the line of fire. He saved many of his fellow soldiers, just like many of you bravely did. He secured a defensive perimeter around the men, and he fired 18 rounds of his N-16 at the enemy. Several years later, the Army report on his Silver Star stated the nature of Ron Kane's heroic effort, and I quote, "His courageous actions in close combat with a hostile force were in keeping with the highest tradition of his military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army." Kane didn't ask me for a ceremony so that he could have a medal pinned upon his chest, but for me and for our district, it was a very small way to say thank you. On Memorial Day of this year, in front of a crowd of several hundred people and 41 years behind schedule, Ron Kane was finally pinned with the Silver Star he so richly deserved. You see, it was something that United States had to do. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher did what they had to do. They forged a powerful partnership. They turned their countries around. They restored them as economic and military superpowers, and the world was better for it. And in the process, they defeated the Soviet Union without firing a shot. And they fundamentally changed the economies of both nations that ushered in a period of peace and prosperity that was unparalleled in the history of the world. We find ourselves today in search of another Margaret Thatcher to restore our great country to the thriving nation that I believe we can be again, and as the leader for global peace and through its resolute strength. But the good news is we can take our country back, because the principles that made our nation great lie here in this hall today. You have lived them. You have exemplified them, not only in this nation, but across the world. We cannot thank you enough for the example that you have given to subsequent generations and to the civilians of this great country. But still, each one of us together with the right leadership, I know we can see America's greatness will once again shine across the world. So American Legion members, I say to you, thank you. Thank you for your unwavering service to the greatest and best Americans, you, the veterans. As we approach this 10th anniversary of 9/11, thank you also for supporting the men and women who answered the call to fight terrorism. Thank you for telling the story of American freedom, because you stand for America's freedoms and for America's heroes. And like American veteran Ron Kane, you're doing what you had to do. God bless you all. God bless the United States of America. Thank you for allowing me to share with you today. God bless you.